Chapter 3, Favorite Points. After sleeping for an unknown length of time, Shen Qingchu finally awoke, more dead than alive. Opening his eyes to the sight of the familiar white gauzy curtains above his head, he knew that he was on Qingjing Peak in his quiet and peaceful residence. He took a deep breath, wanting to stretch, but he suddenly realized that the door had opened, and someone entered. Mingfen held a tray in both hands. Seeing Shen Qingchu awake, he dropped the tray on the table and started to bawl, "Shizun, you're finally awake!" Another person was still standing outside. Lo Binghe lingered by the entrance like he wanted to come in, yet he hesitated. Mingfen sobbed for a while, soaking a large patch of the bed sheets before turning over his shoulder. "Why are you standing here? Don't you know that seeing you annoys Shizun?" he rebuked Lo Binghe. Then he said to Shen Qingchu, "I don't know what's wrong with that kid. He insisted on planting himself there like some kind of stick. He won't leave, no matter how much he's shooed away." Shen Qingchu waved his hand. "No matter. Let him. I will go get Lu Shishu. I will go get Lu Shishu, Zhang Men Shibo, and Mu Shishu," Mingfen said. "They said to alert them as soon as you woke up." After saying this, he scrambled to his feet and rushed outside. It seemed that Shen Qingchu had slept for a very long time, and Yu Qingyan had already returned. As for the Mu Shishu, that had to be Changchao Peak's Mu Qingfan. Changchao Peak specialized in medication and was proficient in the healing arts, so his presence made absolute sense. Lo Binghe let Mingfen pass, but even after Mingfen had gone a distance, he wouldn't leave his spot. He only stared fixatedly into the room, with his fists clenched tightly the entire time. Shen Qingchu slowly sat up. "Do you have something to say? Then come in." Lo Binghe complied and entered the room. With a sudden thump, he fell to his knees before the bed. Shen Qingchu stared at him in alarm. "Wait a moment, system. What's going on? All I did was sleep for a bit. How did things end up like this? How long have I been asleep for? Is it like 10 years in the future or something?" From his kneel, Lo Binghe raised his head, gaze fervent and full of guilt. "Shizun, please forgive this disciple's foolishness and ignorance up to this point." Foolishness and ignorance? You could describe a lot of people with those words, but certainly not Lo Binghe, right? Originally, this disciple was under the impression that Shizun didn't care about him at all. Only after the third match did I understand what painstaking efforts Shizun had put in. No. Your original master really didn't care about you, Shen Qingchu thought desperately. He earnestly wished you dead, really. Although, exactly what painstaking efforts of mine have you noticed? Say it out loud. I'm very curious to know. But Lo Binghe didn't continue speaking on this topic. He only said, entirely earnest, "From this day forth, this disciple will devote himself to carrying out his duty in serving Shizun with all his heart, obeying only Shizun's esteemed commands." Shen Qingchu studied him with a complicated expression. All that past mistreatment and abuse completely forgotten because he'd saved Lo Binghe once? Weren't these favor points a little too easy to farm? To no surprise, at the time he was unable to understand the course of Lo Binghe's thought. With their hundreds and thousands of twists and turns, Shen Qingchu was silent for a moment. "As long as you understand. First, why don't you get up?" Shen Qingchu was silent for a moment. Oh wait, nope, I read that already. Sorry. He still didn't understand this in the slightest. "Bingy, what exactly did you realize?" He watched Lo Binghe slowly stand, yet the boy remained unwilling to leave. Instead, he seemed bashful, as if there was still something he wanted to say. "Is there something else?" Shen Qingchu asked. "Shizun has slept for many days and only just woke up," said Lo Binghe. "I was wondering, do you perhaps have an appetite?" In truth, strictly speaking, Shen Qingchu had long held himself in a state of anida. Even if he didn't eat, he would be fine, but he was unable to resist his nature, which craved good food. As soon as he heard that there were things to eat, his eyes shone with desire. Quite a bit, very much so. Lo Binghe dashed off to the kitchen. For the past few days, every couple of hours, he'd remake a serving of congee, and now it could finally be put to use. After bringing the congee to the table, still steaming hot, Lo Binghe helped Shen Chu sit up on the bed. So solicitous, it made the hair on the back of one's nape stand up. He came just short of spoon-feeding Shen Chu, and a streak of goosebumps ran down Shen Chu's forearms. He ate a few mouthfuls using the ladle himself, and all the while Lo Binghe remained standing by his bedside, silently watching him. Shen Chu thought for a moment, then he was hit by a sudden realization. "It's quite good," he said, reservedly offering a few words of praise. It wasn't just quite good. Even Jing's Peak's name, clear and tranquil, told you that this branch tended towards the fresh and light, and style of their cooks followed the same principle. After eating their food for so long, Shen Chu's taste buds had become dull as dishwater. Even though the bowl in his hand was full of mere congee, perhaps it was an issue of ingredients and technique, but compared to the watery, meager congee he'd had recently, it was on an entirely different level. Snow white congee rice, finely chopped scallions, delicious minced pork, and shredded ginger in just the right amount, all at the perfect temperature. Temperature. There we go. It had been too long. Shen Chu's body wanted nothing but to weep. At this praise, Lo Binghe's eyes shone. "If Shizun likes it, may I give it to him every day, with variations?" Shen Chu choked on the spot. Lo Binghe rushed to pat his back. Shen Chu waved him off, expressing that he was fine. He was only a little shocked. Lo Binghe's excellent cooking skills were his foremost lady-killing technique. Shen Chu had never thought that he would have the rare honor to eat as only a few key harem members in the original work got to cuisine a la Lo Binghe. Man, I suck. Even more shocking was the line, that line. This one, "I'll give it to you every day, with variations." Wasn't that what Lo Binghe had used to coax several spoiled young ladies into willingly and ecstatically entering his harem? Eating whatever you want is fine, but saying whatever you want is not. As Shen Chu's expression had grown strange, Lo Binghe was slightly uneasy. "Shizun dislikes it?" he asked. "You made me free food. Whoever disliked that would be an idiot," Shen Chu said in his mind. That's him in his mind. Shen Chu said amiably, "This master likes it very much. From today onward, I'll leave this to you." Finally, he didn't need to resign himself to eating that insubstantial watery fare. As the oh-so-mighty Jing Peak Lord, why didn't he have the privilege of a private kitchen? Having received approval, Lo Binghe once again blossomed like a spring flower. Shen Chu watched him bloom, and without knowing why, his hand suddenly itched, wanting to pat that head again. Was it possible that Binghe's head had a special magnetic field? That would explain why he couldn't control himself. After sending a happily beaming Lo Binghe away, returning his goodwill by using him as hard labor, Shen Chu called on the system. "Is the scenario at the Endless Abyss unavoidable?" he asked. "If Lo Binghe fails to complete the Endless Abyss scenario, 10,000 satisfaction points will be deducted," said the system. Upon hearing that number, Shen Chu, once again, out of habit, spat up a fountain of blood. Afterwards, he wiped his mouth. Whatever. He'd spat out so much blood that he was used to it at this point. This was immensely logical. If Lo Binghe wasn't shoved into the Endless Abyss, then he wouldn't be able to activate his golden finger. If the protagonist couldn't become overpowered, then where was the satisfaction? Therefore, the Endless Abyss scenario was unavoidable. And as this novel's #1 loser, #1 scum villain, the execution of this glorious task naturally, absolutely, inescapably fell to Shen Chu. Yet, unwilling to resign himself to this fate, Shen Qingchu asked again and ended up sighing. Still unable to give up completely, Lo Binghe, who was certainly like a little son, was destined to fall and become that brooding, cold-blooded demon youth. Even a transmigrator like Shen Qingchu, who by all rights ought to have access to chi powers, was unable to change the inevitability. He had been destined to be the man who threw the protagonist into the endless abyss, thereby catalyzing his overpowered, legendary journey. This job's opportunity for growth were really terrible. If Shen Qingzhu failed to do this, he would lose 10,000 satisfaction points. He couldn't become more thoroughly dead than that. But if he did do this, once Little Binghe activated his golden finger, he definitely wouldn't let him off. The work was difficult, the pay was meager, the benefits were non-existent. What the hell was up with this? Lo Binghe hadn't left for long when several of Shen Qingchu's sect siblings came to visit. Shen Qingchu laid on the bed, reading a novel hidden inside the copy of Dao De Jing. It says there's a little footnote, more commonly known as the Dao De Jing, a famous classical text on philosophy and religion of Taoism by Laozi. When Yu Chongyan entered, he shut the books without missing a beat, so that the novel was tucked inside within the Dao Jing's cover, purposely proudly exposed. He tried to get off the bed, but Yu Chongyan hurriedly stopped him. "Don't move so carelessly," he cautioned. "You shouldn't leave the bed yet. Just keep lying down." Yu Qingyan turned behind him to Mu Qingfan. "Mu Shidi, come take a look." While Shen Qingchu was unconscious, Mu Qingfang had already diagnosed him and provided treatment. This visit was likely for further prognosis. Shen Qingchu held out his wrist. "I'm troubling Mu Shidi," he said politely. Mu Qingfang startled briefly, but he nodded, sitting by the bed and putting his fingers on Shen Qingchu's pulse. With his medical expertise as the Peak Lord of Chan Chao Peak, no matter how complicated the case, he only needed an instant to make a diagnosis and provide a prescription. But he conscientiously remained there for a long while before finally removing his fingers, his expression solemn. "How is he?" Yu Qingyan asked. The patient in question, Shen Qingchu, showed no restraint. "So, can this poison be cured or not?" Shen Qingyi shook out his sleeves, sitting down next to the table with a hump. "It's called without a cure. What do you think?" Shen Qingchu sighed. "Then Mu Shidi might as well tell me. How many years do I have left? How many months? Or how many days?" Mu Qingfan shook his head. "Even though it's without a cure, its effects can be suppressed." His voice was even, neither quiet nor loud, but Shen Qingchu felt like he'd hit the jackpot. Even though this poison was called without a cure, in truth there was a remedy. In the original work, at the Immortal Alliance Conference, with its twists after twists, a lovable, graceful, and subdued little Shimi from another sect was hit by this rare poison. However, importantly, she was the protagonist woman. Was there ever a stallion novel where the male lead let his woman be poisoned to death? If there was, then he would be a subpar, wish-fulfilling protagonist. And that would be a shitty failure of a stallion novel. The cure was incredibly simple. Let us review the developments in the original work. Due to the irresistible power of the plot, in order to save the male lead, whom she'd known for less than 2 hours, that graceful little Shimi let herself be hit by a demon's underhanded trick, and the poison contaminated her body. Lo Binghe felt an absolute obligation to save her, and therefore he took on the burden of looking for a cure for the graceful little Shimi. It just so happened that deep within the mountains where the Immortal Alliance Conference was held, there grew a mystical 1,000-year-old flower. Sorry, Shen Qingchu had already forgotten exactly what the name was. Whatever flower or whatever leaf, because the number of mythical mythical flowers in proud immortal demon way numbered at least in the hundreds, and every single one was at least 1,000 years old. And when you added on the mythical grasses and mythical trees, who the hell could remember all those names? Airplane shooting towards the sky. Do you think mythical flowers are like Chinese cabbages on sale? Leave mythical flowers at least a little bit of dignity that comes with being rare and precious. Lo Binghe was sure this legendary flower would cure the poison within the graceful Shimi's body. He put a tremendous amount of effort into picking it for her. Just doing that took 3 days, 30 chapters. For those 3 days, they journeyed to pick the flower, while fighting monsters and through exchanging flirtatious glances. They developed a deep sense of camaraderie. By the time Lo Binghe finally managed to pick the flower, the graceful Shimi's condition had worsened. Her entire body was fragile and devoid of strength. The two of them were overjoyed, and they hurried to let the graceful Shimi eat the flower raw. However, it was ineffective. The poison wasn't cured. Their hearts sank. The girl thought, since I'm about to die, I must leave behind some memories to ensure that my life won't have been in vain. I don't have many days left, after all, so I won't suppress my feelings any more. Then, using her weak and fragile body, she pushed Lo Binghe down. Lo Binghe put up a brief show of resistance before telling himself, she did it all for my sake. I don't have the heart to reject her final wish. He yielded, still half reluctant, and went along with it. Then, in the end, how was the poison cured? After the down and dirty scene, the girl's poison was naturally cured. Was it ridiculous, cliche, and plausible? But it was satisfying, right? Ridiculously satisfying. So ridiculously satisfying. Look, Lo Binghe was both of human and demon blood, right? And the demon half of his bloodline came from their number one saintly ruler, from the heavenly demons of old. A wee little demonic poison wasn't even strong enough to get stuck between Lo Binghe's teeth, and he instantly absorbed and digested it during their, Incidentally, he even absorbed the nutrients of the mystical flower the girl had just eaten, so his martial ability was once again made great progress. Shit. The so-called protagonist's privilege was that even if he stepped in dog shit, there would probably be a hidden scroll or elixir within it. As Shen Qingchu thought back on the segment of Proud Immortal Demon Way, his facial expression kept changing erratically. He failed to notice even when the others addressed him. Yu Qingyan had to repeatedly call his name many times before he finally returned to himself. What? Mu Qingfeng passed him a piece of paper. Every month, take these 4 medications. Then circulate your spiritual energy with someone who has high quantities of it. This will assist you in maintaining regular spiritual circulation. If you do these things, you shouldn't have any problems. He paused for a moment. The only thing is, I'm afraid that from today onward, Shen Shishong, occasionally your spiritual chi will at times suddenly stagnate, or you may suffer other abnormalities in your circulation. The other 3 people in the room all paid close attention to his expression. One must remember that to cultivators, the stagnation of spiritual circulation was a profoundly terrifying problem, especially if it cropped up during a duel between expert practitioners, where a single slip-up could mean your life. Little did they know, Shen Qingchu was immensely satisfied with this result. For somebody with a scum villain role to be poisoned with something like without a cure and still be able to live, it was giving him much too much confidence. He knew that going at it with the protagonist could have cured the poison, but he could do that, could he? Yu Qingyan sighed. Had I known any of this would come pass, I would not have left the mountains. Shen Qingchu thought his tone was too solemn. The Immortal Alliance Conference has always been a massive event. The various sect leaders must work together to organize, he hurried to say. How could you not have gone, Shishong? This happened due to the demon's underhanded deceits and my own carelessness. You must not hold yourself responsible. If he didn't say this clearly here, given Yu Qingyan's personality, he might never leave the mountains ever again. There we go. He'd stay and defend Chengchong Mountain sect to his last. That was entirely possible. To his surprise, Mu Qingfeng also guiltily declared, "No, the fault is all mine. If I hadn't failed to realize that there was a demonic invasion, and if my skills weren't too poor to fully cure Shen Shishong, it wouldn't have come to this either." No, no, no. It has nothing to do with you two, Shen Qingchu insisted. Come to think of it, I was a bit indelicate and smashed a giant hole into the ground before Qingding Paul with that hammer. The three of them devolved into jumbled apologizing and blame-taking, the scene both chaotic and comical. It left Shen Qingchu both touched and embarrassed, his entire body breaking out into goosebumps and his scalp going numb. Lu Qingyi stared out the window, face expressionless. He waited until they had exhausted themselves, then finally took a sip of tea and said, "This matter must remain secret to all but the 12 Peak Lords. If outsiders became aware that the Peak Lord of Changchong Mountain, second peak had such a deadly weakness, things would be unfun to say the least. All three of the others naturally understood this. Do you think that the burden of Peak Lord will be too heavy, Qingzhu?" asked Yu Qingyan. The original Shen Qingzhu would most likely have suspected that Yu Qingyan was trying to undermine his authority or something of the sort. However, the current Shen Qingzhu knew that Yu Qingyan was genuinely worried about him overworking himself and damaging his health, and he rushed to respond, "Sangmen Qishong, really, don't worry about me anymore. I haven't been crippled to that extent," he smiled. "For now, my hands, feet, and mouth still work, and I still have my cultivation. I'm entirely satisfied." They then discussed a variety of details of the demon invasion before Yu Qingyan and Mu Qingfang took their leave. Shen Qingchu watched them go, thinking it was terribly funny, yet he also felt an unutterable warmth and peace. Even though his fellow disciples' personalities were all different, with some easy to get along with, some difficult, they all breathed as one. Though split it into 12 peaks, whenever something went wrong, they were a dependable family. Excepting the original Shen Qingzhu. I'm guessing that means exceptions. Lu Qingji put down his tea, which had long gone ice cold. If it weren't for your body's lack of ghostly qi, I would definitely suspect you'd been possessed. And the one who remained just happened to be the one of the difficult ones. On a certain level, your guess is very correct. Lo Qingyi continued, "You saved me in the Lingxi caves, and that in itself was inconceivable. During the demon attack, you also rescued some nameless disciple and almost lost your life. You were poisoned to the point of damaging your spiritual energy levels, and you should be furious, yet you've peacefully accepted it? Someone else doing so wouldn't be strange, but you doing so upturns everything." Shen Qingzhu absolutely did not want to discuss the issues of his own OOC personality with Lu Qingyi. He called Mingfen to refresh the tea, then leaned back and smiled. "Nameless? That's only for now." "That disciple of yours, his base is indeed excellent," Lu Qingyi said. "However, a fair number with his level of aptitude are invited into the large sects every year, and in the end, the number who can become truly outstanding is less than 1 in 10,000. Shen Qingzhu suddenly sensed danger. What if Lu Qingyi became a stumbling block on Lu Binghe's journey to becoming overpowered, and during the confrontation between the two of them was KO'd in a snap? For everyone's sake, he needed to warn Lu Qingyi. "Believe me," he said earnestly. "This disciple of mine will definitely be a success. I hope when Lu Shidi has a chance, you can give him a little support and guidance as often as possible." Mingfen was half dead from depression. He had only come to refresh tea, yet he had been forced to hear Shen Qingzhu, his ally in torturing a shared enemy, heap praise after praise upon Lu Binghe. The level of frustration he felt was akin to that of the confidant who, for years, always cursed a little bastard with you, suddenly went and coupled up with the same little bastard you've tormented together. Repulsed, he immediately decided to go be repulsive to others. A stormy Mingfen found Lo Binghe in the kitchen, pondering over what food to make Shen Qingchu in the morning. Mingfen showered him with verbal abuse before issuing a series of commands. Go chop some wood, chop 80 bundles, fill the entire woodshed, fetch water. The water jars in our room are all empty. Are you blind? Can't you see? But Shishong, if the woodshed is full, where will I sleep? Lo Binghe asked, perplexed. Mingfen stomped his foot, spittle flying everywhere. Isn't it flat in here? Isn't that floor enough? I just filled the water jars in your rooms today. That water isn't fresh anymore. Redo it. Refill them all. In the past, some grievances and bitterness might have spouted in Lo Binghe's heart, but today his attitude was completely different. In his eyes, these were all training opportunities. He already had such a good teacher, one who thought of everything for him, who was even willing to sacrifice his life for him, right? What training could he not overcome? What suffering could he not withstand? Lo Binghe didn't say another word. He turned on his heel to get ready to work. Mingfen could derive not even a little satisfaction from his reaction, and instead he felt even more frustrated. He stormed away while cursing. I really can't understand what about that brat caught Shizen's eye. For Shizen to suddenly see him in a new light, a success, outstanding, even if that brat bewitched Shizen with some potion, Lu Shishu still won't guide or support him. Unthinkable, bah! Though Mingfen cursed unceasingly as he went, his voice wasn't loud. But how could Lo Binghe, with his blindingly fast progress and naturally sharp 5 senses, not hear? Mingfen's mutterings were largely harsh words and phrases, but in the midst, he touched on the key words, and in an instant, Lo Binghe took those bits and pieces to guess most of the whole picture. So Shizen had actually spoken about him like that in front of Lu Shishu. The feeling of having someone speak about you so highly somewhere you couldn't see, that feeling was truly indescribably wonderful. Warmth suddenly surged in Lo Binghe's heart. The more it surged, the stronger it became, gradually flowing through his entire body. Lo Binghe felt like a steady strength had taken root somewhere in the deeps of his heart and was starting to bud. Even his hand carrying the heavy wooden bucket seemed to become stronger. At this time, not only did Lo Binghe not feel like other people were making things difficult for him, his expression became joyful and satisfied. If Shen Qingchu were there, he would definitely have suspected that within the depths of his heart, Lo Binghe was actually an extreme masochist. However, Shen Qingchu was astoundingly oblivious to the fact that, thanks to the divine wingman abilities of his useless teammate, Mingfen, Lo Binghe's favor had again risen to a new height. For the time being, Shen Qingchu was lying down in elatation. That day, the always lofty Qingjing Peak's doorsteps almost broke from all the feet rushing across it. The various peak lords all brought their disciples to visit, along with gifts of condolences. After all, during Sha Hualing's armed provocation, the rainbow bridges had been severed, and Chongding Peak had been sealed by a barrier. They had been unable to intervene, and so the burden of the fight had fallen on Shen Qingchu, who had been the sole representative of the older generation. Anyhow, Chengchong Mountain hadn't lost too much face, but no matter whether their past relationships had been good or bad, the peak lords absolutely had to come and express proper sentiments. Shen Qingchu calmly received their greetings and used the chance to learn the faces of several peak lords he hadn't yet met, while also taking the opportunity to make some small talk and strengthen his relationships. That night, he was on cloud 9 as he thought, finally, I can have a peaceful night's sleep. However, 4 hours later, peaceful night's sleep my ass! Shen Qingchu stood in the middle of a stretch of a chaotic nothingness and stared out into the endless horizon. He'd definitely just been drunk on satisfied smiles, comfortably sinking into deep sleep on his bed, so could someone explain why he'd been dragged into this space? Shen Qingchu really wished he had had a gong so that he could ring to some when he could ring to summon the system so that he wouldn't need to always yell at the top of his lungs within his mind, "System, are you online?" The system provides you with 24-hour service. Where is this? What's the situation? This is a world within a dream realm. Of course I know this is a dream realm, said Chen Qingchu. Tell me, how could such an abstract scenery exist in reality? I'm asking why I'm here. Come on, he thought. Please don't let it be what I'm thinking. But this world really wouldn't give him a break. Just as he thought, don't, in the next second, he saw a figure that was unbearably familiar. Lo Binghe stood before him, bewildered in the middle of a never-ending wasteland. He also seemed entirely lost as to why he appeared here. After a moment of bewilderment, Shen Qingchu's form came into view. Lo Binghe startled, then dashed over happily, like a chick who'd seen its mother hen. What kind of shitty analogy was that? Shizun! Lo Binghe had already been trapped in this world for a long time. He was instantly excited by the sight of his Shen Qingchu, and called to him repeatedly, again and again. As soon as Shen Qingchu laid eyes on him, he recognized this place and what scenario he'd been thrust into. Instantly, all of Shen Qingchu's hopes turned to dust, and even as a shower of tears rained down on his heart, he patted Lo Binghe's shoulder. I heard you. No need to call me so many times. Yes, Shizun, Lo Binghe said hurriedly. Why are you here too? Do you know where we are? Being lazy, Shen Qingchu directly echoed the system's lines. This is a world within a dream realm. Then why am I here? Lo Binghe asked again. Anyone else being here is a strange thing, while your presence is quite natural, said Shen Qingchu. This is your dream realm. Mine? Lo Binghe startled and backed up a step, looking at the endless desolate land and sky. My dream realm actually looks like this? The dream realm. One's view of the world reflected one's heart. Lo Binghe was so young, yet his mindscape wasn't filled with the red flowers and the greens of willows. But this bleak scenery, one couldn't help feeling sorrow. Shen Qingchu pretended to ponder for a while. This is not an ordinary dream realm. I'm afraid that while you were unaware, someone tampered with it. The waves of spiritual energy within the dreams are strong and unstable, though this master was inadvertently pulled in by you. This disciple is useless and involves Shizun once again. Lo Binghe's face was ashamed, but he considered this carefully. Exactly who would tamper with my dream realm? Shen Qingchu was ready with answers, fully enjoying the experience of divulging spoilers. No need to think so hard. The borders of this dream realm churn with demonic chi, and any entity who would use such crude techniques undoubtedly must be a demon. Lo Binghe was unsurprised, and these words only deepened his hatred towards that race. The way of the demons are truly poisonous. Shen Qingchu wondered what sort of expression Lo Binghe would make in the future, thinking back on these words once he learned of his own demonic heritage. Not necessarily poisonous, said Shen Qingchu with a smile. Perhaps their intentions are the exact opposite. Someone not in the know couldn't hope to comprehend words spoken from his omniscient perspective. Lo Binghe didn't understand. What did his master mean? But Shen Qingchu's smile seemed profound, and the tail of his sentence was inflected lightly upward in the somewhat teasing tone. It was the sort of hint that made people's imagination run wild. Lo Binghe stopped there, not daring think about it any further. In truth, Shen Qingchu didn't intend to tease. He thought himself very straightforward. The one who tampered with Lo Binghe's dream realm was Sha Hualing. Though she did have some harmful intention, her underlying motive was obvious. Naturally, she was driven by a young girl's secret yearning for love. Otherwise, she would have directed her aggression towards others, not specifically Lo Binghe. Demons were compelled to viciously bully the person they liked. Only if the object of their affections failed to die would the demon accept them. If their target died, that meant that they were useless and not worth nurturing any lingering affections for. This dream realm is rather complicated, said said Shen Qingzhu. An ordinary nightmare technique couldn't trap me. I can dispel those with a mere thought, but this dream realm was truly meticulously constructed. I'm afraid that until the core of the illusion is destroyed, no one will be able to leave. Even Shizun would be trapped in this dream realm forever? Lobinka asked, anxious. Shen Qingzhu glanced at him. You will be too. Lobinka's mind jolted and his face going from red to white. It's all this disciple's fault. The situation is what it is, so there's no use to crying it, said Shen Qingzhu. We should devise a solution as soon as possible, dispel the barrier, and take our leave. Lobinka silently nodded and followed behind Shen Qingzhu as they headed towards the dream realm's border. Shen Qingzhu's face was smooth and unchanging, but his mind was a stormy sea. He was having an intense back and forth with the system. System alert, you are entering an important subplot scenario, the dream demon Meng Mo's barrier. During the subplot, please make sure to assist Lobinka in defeating Meng Mo's illusion, otherwise 1,000 satisfaction points will be deducted. There it was again, always deducting satisfaction points, and every time it was a heart attack-inducing number. After assiduously working for so long, Shen Qingzhu had only managed to scrounge a couple of satisfaction points here and there while the system could remove 1,000 points in a single deduction. Was this really fair? As a person, no. As a system, you shouldn't be so inflexible. This wasn't the main point, though. The main point was that this was the wrong script. Let us summarize this scenario's original setup. Lobinka was pushed into Meng Mo's sphere of influence. But before danger struck, he instinctively sought protection and pulled the person he trusted the most into the barrier with him. Shen Qingzhu urgently called to the system, Master, good master, esteemed master, there's been a bug, right? In this section, Lobinka should be cozying up with the maiden, and the maiden is responsible for unraveling his complex and using love to help him defeat his inner demons. How come I've been thrust into this role? Where is the promised deep and emotional heart-to-heart where she's accepted into his harem? Where is the promised little Shimi who refuses to leave him either in life or in death? Our self-inspection failed to find a bug. The system is running normally. No bug? That means that in this scenario, Shen Qingzhu either had to carry out that role or die. This was the butterfly effect. Originally, the one who was pulled into Lobinka's nightmare was Ning Yingying, as Lobinka's closest, most trusted confidant on Qingjing Peak in the early story. This gate-crushing intimacy-building task was clearly her job. What was happening now? How had the hat of closest, most trusted confidant nonsensically landed on Shen Qingzhu's head? I would like to express that I am overwhelmed by this honor, but I don't at all want to accept this special distinction. Shizun, what's wrong? Lobinka asked in concern, seeing his unreadable expression. Shen Qingzhu promptly pulled himself together. Nothing's wrong, he said calmly. This master was thinking that demons who manipulate dream realms often target weaknesses of the human heart. You must be vigilant and on your guard. Lobinka nodded, his expression firm. This disciple definitely won't allow Shifu to be dragged in again. Huh? Why is it? Oh, yeah. I wasn't expecting it to be Shifu, because normally he says Shizun. This was miserable. Not only had Shen Qingzhu been thrust into the dangerous situation, on top of that, he had to assume the task of playing out the maiden's role. Shen Qingzhu absolutely didn't want to charge through a mountain of knives or a sea of fire with the male lead to confront the terrifying Master Meng Mo while also blocking knives for him and even providing free psychological therapy. That said, complaining was useless. In the past, when he'd been faced with this kind of situation, his habit had been to cuss out Airplane shooting towards the sky. But honestly, Great Master Airplane was also innocent. He was a proper upright stallion novel author, and he definitely wouldn't have wanted something like this to happen in his work. A healthy maiden being replaced by a scum villain? How disheartening! Ordinary readers would throw the book to the floor. The two of them kept walking, and the clouds above and scenery around them, like a kaleidoscope, sometimes lengthening and twisting, and the other time shattering into thousands of fragments, always erratic. The picture formed by the world they walked through was exceedingly eerie, like the people had been illustrated by Da Vinci, while the backgrounds had been illustrated by Picasso. The style clash was extraordinarily intense. Suddenly, from within the dense layer of cloud emerged the buildings of a city. They stopped in their steps. Lo Binghe looked at Shen Qingchu, waiting for his signal. Counter soldiers with arms and floods the earthen dams, Shen Qingchu muttered to himself. We deal with whatever situations arise as appropriate. Forward. As they walked to the city gates, Lo Binghe raised his head, his expression becoming slightly puzzled. Shen Qingchu knew very well what he was thinking. The city looked very familiar. Of course it was familiar. This was the city Lo Binghe had wandered while homeless during his childhood. The city gates naturally had no guards defending them and slowly opened by themselves. Shen Qingchu led him inside. This dream realm was frightening in its realism. When abstract, it was so abstract that it became blobs in color. When photorealistic, it was so photorealistic as to be indistinguishable from reality. The city streets, markets, residents, vendor stalls, every single one was intricate enough to make your hair stand on end. Lit brightly with lamps, with people coming and going from a distance, it looked like a bustling and lively. But when Shen Qingchu drew close, even though he had long prepared himself, his heart still almost escaped his rib cage. These people moving about were, to one, faceless. Every visage was a blurry mass, features unclear, none of them made a sound. They didn't seem like living people at all, yet they still milled around, wandering back and forth. The entire city was deathly silent, its busyness entirely uncanny. Lo Binghe had never seen a scene like this. Shizun, he said, aghast, what are these things? Shen Qingchu was panicked a little from terror, but he took on the duty of being an expository encyclopedia. Expository encyclopedia. This is an illusionary city created via a nightmare. In the dream realm, one can create inanimate objects such as buildings and trees, but not living people. At most, they can be fashioned to this extent, speechless monsters that lack noses and faces. Even so, to be able to construct something on the scope of a city, and to make it nearly like onto reality, I'm afraid it can only be one person. Lo Binghe was incredibly cooperative, and he humbly sought instruction. One person? Mengmo. Mengmo, the dream demon, was the boss of this instance of the dream realm. Mengmo's true identity was that of a famously brilliant and accomplished elder among demons. Several hundred years ago, a bout of divine punishment had destroyed his physical body, but his powerful spirit had endured, undamaged. From then on, he had become a parasite within others' dream realms, subsiding by absorbing their spiritual energy and vitality. At the same time, he was also one of the protagonist's teachers on his road to becoming a demon. Thus, we can give him a more direct and intimate nickname like the Portable Grandfather. Mengmo was the one who, after Lo Binghe broke through the barrier, formalically took a liking to the protagonist, formalically taught him everything about his lost arts, and formalically, from that point forth, occasionally helped the male lead think up of plans for taking care of small fry. I've definitely said that word wrong like all 3 times. Lo Binghe still wanted to ask a few more questions, but then his eyes involuntarily swept through the crowd and froze for a split second. Despite knowing the answer, Shen Qingchu asked, "What's wrong?" "Faces," Lo Binghe blurted out. "Shizun, just now I think I saw people with faces." Shen Qingchu readily heeded his words and kept it concise. "We follow." They closely tailed the few figures who were incongruously with the people and in style of the surroundings, turning and twisting through the city until they finally stopped before an alley. In total, there were 5 people with faces. They appeared to be 5 youths, each one equipped with noses and features. The 4 taller figures surrounded one on the ground, and they cursed and yelled incessantly. Words like little mongrel and bastard poured from their mouths. They completely failed to notice the 2 people behind them. "It looks like they can't see us," said Lo Binghe. He looked at Shen Qingchu as if to ask, "Didn't you say Meng Mo was incapable of creating people with complete features?" "Time for more angst!" Shen Qingchu heaved a heavy sigh in his heart. Meng Mo indeed cannot create people using nightmares, but he didn't create these individuals. Lo Binghe looked more closely at their faces. Lo Binghe slowly turned his gaze towards them, and although his expression didn't change much, in a flash a drop of cold sweat dripped down his forehead. "These are not illusions created by Meng Mo," said Shen Qingchu. "They are projections of real people from your memories. Meng Mo only awakened these reflections from the memories sleeping within your mind." But Lo Binghe could no longer hear him. He placed his hands on his temples, it seemed as if his head was twitching. Shen Qingchu knew that Lo Binghe's inner demons had already struck. Those 4 rowdy youths surrounded the child in the alley, who appeared to be only about 4 or 5 years old, and they punched and kicked him. That shabbily dressed child had covered his head with both arms and curled up on the ground, soundlessly taking the beating. It really made one worry that they would beat the young one to death. "This little mongrel sure is blind, daring to enter our territory and snatch our food. Must be tired of living." Step on him! He's so pitiful, right? Hungry with nothing to eat, right? Beat him to death and he won't have to worry about that." Lo Binghe's head hurt, like it was splitting open. That small, frail figure on the ground was his young self from the past. Though the disheveled hair and blood-stained face, 2 bright eyes like stars, like sharp wooden swords lancing forward, met his gaze. Lo Binghe was completely unable to look away. "Pull yourself together," Shen Qingchu said lowly. "It's only an illusion." However, the terrifying thing about Meng Mo was that he specialized in summoning the human heart's deepest terror, rage, and misery in order to destroy a person's psychological defenses. To a Lo Binghe who had already activated his god mode cheats, the power of 10,000 Meng Mos together would amount to little more than parlor tricks. But the Lo Binghe now, whose demonic blood had yet to awaken, was trapped in the dream realm in his dark memories. All he could see was his own powerlessness. Suddenly, the alley seemed disorientated, transforming into another one. Not good, Shen Qingchu thought. A second killing blow without time to prepare. They were in a broken-down little hut. The hut only had 1 bed, a crooked little table with a dimly lit oil lamp on top, and a small wooden bench. On the bed lay a haggard old woman. With great effort she tried to prop herself up, but from the beginning to end she was unable to do so. A small figure rushed in from outside. A tender-faced Lo Binghe, only a little over 10 years old, supported the woman. Around his neck hung that jade pendant. "Mother, why are you getting up again?" he asked anxiously. "Didn't we say it's fine to rest?" The woman coughed. "Lying down doesn't help with anything. Might as well get up and wash the clothes." "I already finished washing," said Lo Binghe. "Mother, lie down and wait for me to finish simmering your medicine. You can work after you take it and get better." The woman's face was ashen, her sickness long beyond cure, and she had little time left to live. She smiled while patting Lo Binghe's head. "Binghe is so sweet." Little Lo Binghe lifted his face, forcing himself to smile. "What does mother want to eat?" "These days I have less and less appetite," the woman paused, then hesitantly added, "The last time our house's young master threw out his white congee, I did wish for a bit of a taste. I wonder if the kitchens have any left. Little Lo Binghe vigorously nodded. I will go ask for mother. Just asking is enough, the woman warned him again and again. If there is none left, then just make something light and soupy. As long as it fills the stomach, it's fine. Absolutely do not request anything from the chef. Lo Binghe promised profusely, then ran out like the wind, his feet clapping against the ground. After lying down for a while, the woman felt beneath her pillow for a needle and thread and started doing needlework. The lamplight in the hut became dimmer and dimmer. While Lo Binghe's mind was unclear, he reached out, trying to grasp something. Shen Qingzhu grabbed his hand. Lo Binghe, he said forcefully, look carefully. This isn't your mother, and you are no longer that helpless child who could only endure humiliation. One of the things that made this nightmare so lethal was that the more agitated the trapped victim became, the more damage it would do to their mind. Lo Binghe's present extreme instability was terribly harmful to his spirit. Another dangerous thing that you needed to remember was that you absolutely could not attack the people who appeared in your dream realm. Every single person was formed from the mind and consciousness of the dream realm's host. As soon as you attacked them, you would also be attacking your own brain. Many people, not knowing this or unable to control their emotions, attacked the people in the dream realm who'd hurt them in the past and thereby sent themselves into a coma. If Lo Binghe fell into that state, Shen Qingzhu would of course also be trapped in his dream with him. The scenery around them shifted erratically. The nightmare was a collection of Lo Binghe's misfortune and trauma from his short decade-plus years of life. The scene suddenly transformed into little Lo Binghe pleading with the house chef to grant his adopted mother a bowl of congee before being ridiculed by the manor's young master. Then it became the time, Then it became the time right after he joined Jingjing Peak, where he'd been subjected to exclusion and spite by his numerous shishong, his frail form straining as he swung a rusty axe or carried pails of water up the long stairs as his steps slowed more and more. The moment when his treasured jade pendant was snatched away, never to be found. The disordered senses piled up as they came, one after another, without pause. The present Lo Binghe could neither see nor hear anything beyond this maelstrom of images and memories. Within his head there was only an ongoing explosion of hatred, despair, suffering, helplessness, and fury from those times, churning endlessly within his chest and mind. The only way to dispel this nightmare would be to undo the tangles in one's heart, thereby causing the nightmares to collapse on itself. But Lo Binghe's fists were tightly clenched. Cracking sounds came from his fingers, his breathing grew increasingly unsteady, his eyes turned an unnatural red, and a faintly discernible current of spiritual power coursed around him, as if his desire to attack were growing nearly irresistible. Standing near him was supremely dangerous, thought Shen Qingzhu. Don't attack them, Shen Qingzhu said harshly. Even if you hit them, you'll be the one who's injured. Lo Binghe could no longer hear his words. He lifted his right arm, and a powerful spiritual blast flew forth from his palm, hurtling straight forward to destroy the people laughing freely within the illusion. Shen Qingzhu cried out in his heart. No matter how painful, his body still understood its duties. He rushed over, throwing himself before the illusion, blocking the spiritual blast head-on. It struck his lower abdomen. In that instant, Shen Qingzhu felt like he'd been stomped on by an elephant, his vision going dark. If this weren't the dream realm, he'd have vomited in an endless fountain of blood, as expected of the protagonist. Shen Qingzhu's face was drenched with tears. Lo Binghe was obviously only a young disciple, so how could he release such a powerful spiritual blast? It seemed that ever since he'd unlocked the OOC function, not only had he not accomplished any grand achievements, the only thing he'd done aside from blocking blows was block more blows. And also block some blows. He was doing just grand as a self-sacrificial man should, wasn't he? With this attack of Lo Binghe's, the illusion around them was broken, and the people and objects all shattered like glass into thousands of shards. The illusionary landscape transformed into a remote forested wilderness. The sky was dark blue, and the lone, cold moon hung high and golden above their heads. Lo Binghe's mind instantly cleared. He first stared blankly, speechlessly at the half-kneeling Shen Qingchu, who was unable to stand. Then he lowered his head to look at his own palm. There was a shred of a remaining spiritual power that was still flowing through his fingertips. Vaguely remembering what he'd just done, his face turned stark white. Lo Binghe threw himself to Shen Qingchu's side to support him, both worried and regretful. "Shizun, why didn't you hit back?" With Shen Qingchu's level of spiritual power, he would have been wholly capable of returning Lo Binghe's spiritual blast, forcing their powers to collide and directly pitting them against each other until the stronger one won. Not only could he have dissolved Lo Binghe's attack, he could have deflected it back at him. "Foolish child," Shen Qingchu said simply, expressing his innermost feelings. Then he continued weakly. "The point was to ensure you wouldn't be injured. If I deflected it back and injured you, what would be the purpose of that?" That frail voice made Lo Binghe want to strike his own heart and kill himself. But now the one injured is Shizun. It hadn't been long since they fought those 3 matches against the Demon Realm, and Shizun had already again been injured for his sake, and this time by his own hand. Shen Qingchu saw the self-blame and misery on that child's face about to overflow, and unable to stand it, he said consolingly, Can your cultivation compare to mine? Even if this master took several more blows, it wouldn't matter. Lo Binghe would have preferred Shen Qingchu be as he had in the past, and vent his anger by viciously beating and cursing him. Even if he were utterly ignored, scorned, and ridiculed, it would have been easier on his heart. On the contrary, Shen Qingchu's tone and words were unerringly gentle, and so Lo Binghe was struck dumb and speechless, completely at a loss for what to do. After a long moment, he said in a low voice, "It's all my fault." The early Lo Binghe indeed walked the path of a brainless moe white lotus. Shen Qingchu feared he'd once again fallen into the self-flagellating pattern of anxious people-pleaser. "It has nothing to do with you," Shen Qingchu explained patiently. "The ways of the demons are extremely unpredictable and impossible to guard against. However, if you don't want to run into similar troubles in the future, you must become stronger." These words were spoken purely out of his personal feelings. This was a world of immortals and monsters where the strong ate the weak. Becoming stronger was the only way to guarantee that you wouldn't become cannon fodder to be pushed around by the world. Lo Binghe's thoughts shifted, and without speaking, he suddenly raised his head, fixing his steady gaze on Shen Qingchu. Shen Qingchu's heart thumped. Lo Binghe's eyes, dark like obsidian, flashed with a light more dazzling than the reflection of the moon and stars. That look in his eyes, that kind of protagonist look full of resolute conviction and blazing, firing spirit. Could it be I've already become the protagonist's guiding star on his life path going forward? Lo Binghe fell into a proper kneeling position by Shen Qingchu's side. "I understand," he said in a strong, clear voice. "Wait, what did you understand this time? Can you not say only half your words every time? Tell me the rest." Shen Qingchu didn't notice that as Lo Binghe spoke this sentence, he didn't use this disciple to address himself. Lo Binghe tightly clenched his fist. "This kind of thing," he said, enunciating each word. "I definitely won't let it happen a second time. Letting Shizun protect his weak self, letting Shizun be injured because of him, this kind of thing absolutely could not happen again." Shen Qingchu let out an "oh." What's going on? He suddenly had this "the protagonist is protecting me, I feel so safe" kind of feeling. What exactly was going on? Save your ass. This person will carve you into a human stick in the future. Wake up! Shen Qingchu was filled with a plethora of complex emotions. Fuck. Originally this conviction to become stronger to protect my most important person should have been inspired by the protagonist seeing the female lead's frail, lovely, and delicate panting form after she sustained an an injury while helping him. Was the system laying all the emotional labor associated with the female's lead role on Shen Qingzhu to hand out the wrong script at this point? Also, if you're giving me extra parts, could you at least offer me complimentary meals? Taking on a main character's long and tedious lines while being paid an extra thin, meager wage, this was labor exploitation out of selfishness. Shen Qingzhu managed to lift a hand and pat Lu Binghe on the head. Lu Binghe's originally stubborn gaze froze, and as if a handful of clearing spring water had doused his flickering anger. Shen Qingzhu thought for a moment. Actually, you need not to worry too much. If you cannot become strong, I will stay by your side and protect you. Instead of letting Lu Binghe become that pitch-black basket case of a young man who made destroying the world his personal mission, it'd be better if he could stay this delicate little white lotus forever. Shen Qingzhu absolutely wouldn't have minded keeping this iteration of Lu Binghe by his side and taking care of him for a lifetime. These were his simple thoughts, but to the person hearing his words, they didn't sound so simple. Lu Binghe was wholly dumbfounded. No one had ever made such a straightforward and impassionated promise to him. Even though the world was large, few people in it could say, "You need not become strong. I am here, and of course I won't let you be bullied." And they weren't empty words. If Shizun said he could do it, he could. He had already proven time and time again with his actions that he would rather sustain grievous injury than let Lu Binghe suffer even a tiny bit of harm. Still, the sense of indulgence within these words was too much to bear. At that first surge of warmth slowly subsided, a burning heat crawled up Lu Binghe's face. Shen Qingzhu coughed for a while, miserably discovering that coughing up blood within the dream realm was impossible, then pinched Lu Binghe's arm. "All right, first help me up." Lu Binghe realized that where his wrist had been pinched neither hurt nor itched. Instead, it tingled. Immediately, he also realized his thoughts were overstepping and scolded himself a little. Thinking such nonsense at a time like this, how disrespectful to Shizun! He hurriedly organized his thoughts and did as he was told. Suddenly, a voice sounded out of nowhere. That hoarse, aged voice made an inquisitive noise and said, "You're quite something to actually break through this elder's barrier, boy." That voice echoed all around them. It was impossible to determine which direction it had come from. The level's boss had finally appeared. Lu Binghe was supporting Shen Qingzhu and didn't raise to his feet, his gaze wary. Mingmo had appeared while Shen Qingzhu was injured, and things were not looking good. If Lu Binghe resolved himself that if Mingmo tried to attack, even with his paltry strength, he would still give his all to impede him and earn Shen Qingzhu every possible chance of survival. The instant he made his decision, that voice spoke again. "Come over here and let this elder see what kind of young hero is capable of such a thing." Lu Binghe looked at Shen Qingzhu. The later's entire mind was filled with the thought of, "I've finished my friendship performance. I can finally leave work now." And he was extremely cheerful. He even felt like teasing his student. "The senior is asking for the young hero. Why don't you reply?" Lu Binghe's face reddened. He turned and spoke in a clear voice. You flatter me. The barrier was broken by my master's strength alone." The voice humped as if in disdain. Shen Qingzhu knew why he humped. Though he had blocked an attack for Lu Binghe, this was Lu Binghe's dream realm, and so Lu Binghe needed to wrest back control of his consciousness before the nightmare could be broken. But Shen Qingzhu couldn't be bothered to explain. The voice spoke. This elder wants you to come over, boy, but I don't want this ordinary cultivator from Changchong Mountain to hear our conversation. I'll have him sleep first." As expected, the circumstances were exactly the same as when Ning Yingying had played this role in the original story. Everyone aside from Lu Binghe would be waved off stage by Mingmo. A headache instantly came over Shen Qingzhu, and he collapsed heavily. Alarmed, Lu Binghe gathered him in his arms. "Shizun!" he called. he called. Shizun! No need to worry, said Mengmo. This elder only sent him into a dream within a dream. He's just in a deeper sleep. Get over here, you. This time it was possible to discern where the voice was coming from. A pitch-black cave off to the west. Lo Binghe couldn't wake Shen Qingzhu. He carefully laid his master on the ground, then turned and spoke in the direction of the voice. My master acknowledged you as a senior, so I must treat you with the same courtesy. I hope you won't cause Shizun trouble. Mengmo chuckled. I saw your memories, boy. This master of yours does not treat you well. Why not just let me get rid of him? I would be doing you a favor. The memories Mengmo had looked at were mostly those of interactions between the original Shen Qingzhu and Lo Binghe. Those memories were indeed the greatest in number, but Lo Binghe shook his head. Shizun isn't like you say, senior. In addition, no matter what, Shizun is my honored master. He can treat me however he likes. But as his disciple, I cannot disrespect him. Mengmo humped. How backwards! The human realm's righteous path is full of this type of hypocritical morality. So what if he's an honored one or not, your master or whatever? If someone mistreats or harm me, they should be killed. He knew your cultivation was not sufficient to face Skyhammer, yet he still sent you out for that match. Were his intentions not clear? At that time, even I didn't believe I could win, said Lo Binghe. But Shizun believed in me. Not only did he give me an opportunity, but he even encouraged me during the match. And in the end, I truly did win. The next sentence he said silently and only to himself. For my sake, Shizun blocked 2 attacks meant for me. His goodwill is genuine. Mengmo had only randomly skimmed some memory fragments. He didn't understand Shen Qingzhu's behavior, nor did he want to try unraveling the issue, though he was quite pleased with Lo Binghe's attitude. You, boy, are a person who values loyalty and bounds. Not even a thousandth of how Shizun does towards me, said Lo Binghe. If Mengmo had a mouth, its corners would have been twitching. He opted to change the topic. After murmuring for a moment, he said, This elder senses that within your body something is being suppressed. Even though I cannot tell exactly what it is, it must be something surpassively remarkable. Lo Binghe was a little shocked. What sort of things is it that even you can't tell? Mengmo chuckled. My race produces master cultivators in droves. It's not impossible that a demon more illustrious than this elder sealed something within your body. In that case, Mengmo surely wasn't so eager to throw away his several hundred-year-old reputation that he'd waste time tricking an impoverished teenager who had nothing. Nevertheless, Lo Binghe stared in disbelief. Does Senior mean that the thing in my body is related to demons? What, are you displeased? Mengmo asked sneeringly, eager to sever any connections with the demon race. Lo Binghe's state of shock didn't last for too long. His thoughts whirled rapidly before he declared, The demon realm does many evils of all kinds and has injured my master multiple times. Naturally, I cannot associate with them. Mengmo became depressed. Can you go 3 sentences without mentioning that master of yours, boy? Let this elder guess. The next thing you want to ask is, may I ask the senior if there's a method to remove something from my body? Lo Binghe smiled wryly. Even if I ask, would the senior tell me? Mengmo laughed boisterously. It's not that I don't want to tell you, but it is truly beyond me. I can't even see it clearly. How can I tell you how to remove it? If not for the fact that I couldn't make sense of you, boy, I would have already killed you both. Why else would I care to drag this out for so long? You think I've that much time on my hands? Lo Binghe didn't speak. He was thinking, you don't even have a body anymore. You're just a shade being, a parasite on others' dreams' realms. If Mengmo didn't have time, who did? Mengmo, unaware that Lo Binghe was internally ridiculing him, continued, Removing it would be impossible for me, but suppressing it is not out of the question. Senior is willing to tell me how? Lo Binghe asked tentatively. Not only can this elder teach you how to suppress it, he can teach you much more, said Mengmo leadingly. This implication was extremely blatant, and Lo Binghe understood. His heart sank. You want me to cultivate the demonic path? As his tone turned cold, Mengmo's temper flared. What's wrong with cultivating the demonic path? If you cultivate the demonic path, that thing in your body will bring great benefits to your cultivation. You could leap 1,000 kilometers in a day. You could stand above the thousands. There are not empty words. With time, your power could overturn and sweep away the entirety of the three realms and heavens and earth within. It would all be simple. At that last part, Lobinga's heart jolted. 1,000 kilometers in a day? Stand above 3,000? The entirety of the three realms swept away before him? That was to say, he'd become strong, the strongest. He quickly rejected this thought. Shen Qingchu hated the way of demons more than anything. If he couldn't resist this, Meng Mo's temptations to become a demonic cultivator, how could he face his master? Whether Shen Qingchu would be thunderously angry or drown in depression, either way, Lobinghe definitely didn't want to find out. No, so he resolutely refused. Meng Mo sneered. If you refuse to learn from me, you won't be able to suppress the demonic energy in your body. It's hidden deeply now, and you're fine because it can't be seen, but this elder senses that the steel in your body is weakening. One day in the future, when that power breaks through, how will that good Shifu of yours treat you? He who abhors evil and makes eliminating demons and upholding justice his mission? Even as Meng Mo articulated Lobinghe's greatest worry, Lobinghe clenched his teeth. This junior is but an ordinary cultivator, for whom achieving even foundation establishment is full of perils and hardships. Why do you insist I cultivate the demonic path? This question was way too high level. Other than the author who could explain why all the great geniuses and masters were always crying and pleading for the protagonist to be their apprentice disciples / son-in-law? No, in fact, even more authors probably didn't know the answer to this eternal riddle. You should appreciate others' kindness, boy. This elder can see that you are extraordinary. Would you rather all my knowledge vanish like a smoke with all my physical body? How many people would beg for it to no avail? Lobinghe showed no feeling on his face. At his refusal to reply, Meng Mo felt a rush of ominous premonition. Sure enough, the next time Lobinghe opened his mouth, he did so with a pure and harmless smile. Surely Senior isn't so eager to teach me because he's unwilling to let his knowledge vanish without a successor, right? He asked slowly and composed. Meng Mo cried to himself, Not good. If one lives by feeding off of others' dream realms and one often changes hosts, one's spirit will be weakened and suffer damage during the transfer, said Lobinghe. But if one were to live long-term within a set host body, one could instead preserve and nurture the spirit to stabilize it. He paused. Senior Meng Mo, could it be that you're already approaching your limit and that's why you have to pick me to be the host you'll raise? Having been seen through, Meng Mo neither denied it nor became angry. Instead, he grandly admitted, That's right. Who'd have thought, boy, that you were actually so well learned and knowledgeable that you'd even know something like this? Lobinghe's expression was unperturbed. That's not a word, I feel, but it's what we're going with. Unable to enunt what this boy was thinking, Meng Mo continued, However, don't assume that this elder absolutely must have you as a host. Wonderfully gifted demons number in the millions, and one of them would beg on their knees for this special honor. You're the one who should carefully consider whether you can afford to miss this opportunity. In truth, over these long years, Meng Mo's spirit had steadily degenerated. He had originally resided within the demonic devices and happily lived there. With 180 years of meditation, he would have been brimming with energy again, but it had just so happened that Sha Hualing, unaware of this, had, at the end of the series of absolute coincidence, used the device as a weapon and unloaded it on Lobinghe. Consequently, Meng Mo had not the strength to search for another host. But on the road to his doom, he'd unexpectedly discovered that buried within this body and consciousness of this boy he newly resided in lay concealed a faintly discernible yet incredible power. He'd been ecstatic. How could he have let this go? He already decided that no matter how adamantly Lo Binghe refused, he'd wheedle and pester, make threats and promises, even if it meant exhausting every single method he had. He would persuade the boy to learn his demonic technique in order to make Lo Binghe's body and conscience even a more suitable residence for him. This elder will give you time, so think it through carefully, said Mengmo. Otherwise, I'll trap your and your master's consciousness within the demon realm forever. This elder is capable of that much. Lobinga's head snapped up. For an instant, as cold light flashed in the youth's eyes, Mengmo froze, intimidated. Right now, you are discussing terms with me, and yet you are free to say anything. Lobinghe's gentle and humble demeanor from moments before were entirely gone, and his voice bitterly cold. But if you harm Shizun, any agreement is void. Mengmo was frozen for a long time before he finally returned to himself, stunned that he'd actually been terrorized by the presence of an ordinary, insignificant cultivator of the human realm. He had intimidated souls throughout the three realms for hundreds of years. Even in the miserable battle where his corporeal form had been destroyed, he had not lost to anyone in terms of presence. How could he have known that in future generations this presence would be called the protagonist's exclusive aura of badassery? The cave exploded with sudden bellowing laughter. Boy, you really have quite the temper. As that ancient voice said those words, Lo Binghe felt his limbs become heavy, the scenery around him spinning before he plunged into darkness. In a flash, and with a start, Lo Binghe woke inside the woodshed, his back utterly drenched with sweat. At the same time, Shen Qingzhu also sprang up in bed, like a corpse coming alive after death. Head dizzy and vision spinning, he gasped for a breath for a while, and only then did he finally relax. Horrible, horrible enough to die. How come when in the original work, Mengmo dragged Ning Yingying into a dream within a dream, her dream was a comforting childhood memory wherein her parents had let her pick flowers and ride horses? How come on his turn, he had first been surrounded by fist-sized man-eating wasps, then dashing madly through the narrowing passages of a tomb while closely pursued by a giant ball of fire? The most terrifying thing was that in the final part of the dream within a dream, Mengmo had woven in Shen Qingzhu's greatest fear. Within a damp, dark dungeon, he had been suspended in mid-air by a ring around his waist, unable to feel his limbs. When he opened his mouth, no sound came out, and he could only helplessly hiss. His entire body burned with pain. Only after an unknown length of time had passed did the sound of a stone door opening drift from outside the dungeon. Footsteps, neither fast nor slow, steadily approached him. Then the shadow of a person was cast on the floor before him. On an ink-black hem, exquisite motifs were embroidered in the silver thread. From that person's emanated an ice-cold pressure, more stifling than the dungeon's airless darkness. Shen Qingzhu couldn't clearly see that person's face, but he knew very well who they were. Mengmo truly deserved to be a legend among demons. That dream realm had been far, far too realistic. Even now, the damp odor of decay seemed to linger in Shen Qingzhu's nose, nauseating him. Shen Qingzhu managed to keep sitting for a while, then he rolled off the bed and began to retch. Ding dong, now of all fucking times, a system notification sprang up. Congratulations on completing the scenario Mengmo's Barrier. The system awards you plus 500 satisfaction points. Please continue to work hard. Shen Qingzhu made a stop gesture and still had enough in him to try settling depths. Let's have a proper discussion, he said. When you threatened to deduct satisfaction points, it wasn't 500, right? Why not set it at 500 for both? Are large punishments and small rewards really fair? And I went through the extra scenario, the dream within a dream, so why haven't you awarded any extra B points to me? System! System, don't play dead. Let's sign a new contract. At this moment, someone slammed open the bamboo house's front door and rushed inside like a gust of wind. Shizun! Shen Qingzhu knew who it was just from the sound. He miserably rolled his eyes. He really didn't want to see that face right now. Lo Binghe had already thrown himself to Shen Qingchu's side, overflowing with anxiety. Shizhen, how are you? Do you feel the least bit uneasy? Truthfully, not too terrible. If you could stay a bit further away, I'd be even better. Shen Qingchu averted his face with unyielding strength and poise, stood by himself. Everything is well within this master. Lo Binghe had wanted to help him up, yet his hand had been reflectively shoved away. He couldn't help but freeze. Shen Qingchu didn't notice these small shifts in Lo Binghe's emotions. He tidied his clothes, verifying to himself that even though he wore only an inner robe, his image remained spotless. Did that Ming Mo trouble you further afterwards? Trouble my ass. Ming Mo would have been falling over himself to lick Lo Binghe's boots. Shen Qingchu was asking despite knowing. Lo Binghe hesitated a bit before he replied. That demon elder's spiritual strength seems to be lacking. This disciple was expelled from the dream realm after a short while. Shizun, did you encounter anything inside the dream within a dream? Even if I did encounter something, could this master not handle it? Shen Qingchu boasted shamelessly. Of course he couldn't handle it. Even now the shadow of being a human stick remained. With Lo Binghe so close to him, his entire body was tingling, and he couldn't help averting his gaze to suppress his fear. Unsure of the reason for this, Lo Binghe only saw that Shen Qingchu's expression was odd, his gaze no longer calmly looking straight at him like he usually did these days. It made his heart both fret and anxious. Luckily, Shen Qingchu adjusted his attitude with superlative quickness, remembering that he was a teacher and what he should be doing at this time. In the next instant, he reached out and took Lo Binghe's wrist. Being attacked by a demon is no joke, he said firmly. This master will examine you for a moment. We cannot be negligent. Yes, said Lo Binghe obediently, as his wrist firmly held. His heart had just known a moment of ease, but now it was once more suspended. On the off chance, Shen Qingchu uncovered Meng Mo and exposed the peculiarity within his body afterward. But though Shen Qingchu diligently examined Lo Binghe for a time, he didn't detect anything off. Of course he didn't. Meng Mo had several hundred years' worth of skill and experience, and his celebrated reputation wasn't exaggerated in the slightest. However, Shen Qingchu still had to go through the motions. His examination fruitless, he nevertheless repeatedly urged Lo Binghe to visit Chengzhou Peak and Chongding Peak the next day, to let the other people examine him, and finally to absolutely say something if an issue arose. Yet Lo Binghe had no intention of leaving. With the appearance of someone full of worries, he started and stopped speaking several times before asking, Shizun, demons, are they all really wicked beyond redemption? Must every last one of them be exterminated? Shen Qingchu didn't reply to this question right away. He stood in place, indeed finding it difficult to answer. Seeing Lo Binghe petrified, forcefully keeping calm while also somewhat anticipating his teacher's answer, Shen Qingchu spoke slowly. Humans can be good or bad, so naturally demons can be good or evil. We often see demons victimizing people, but that doesn't mean that there aren't cases where humans harm innocent demons. Don't put too much weight on race. This was the first time Lo Binghe had heard a teacher express this kind of opinion. He listened in a daze, heart thumping wildly. Shizun means, even if someone is closely connected to demons, that doesn't mean the heavens find them intolerable? Is that right? How can you claim they're intolerable to the heavens in the first place? Shen Qingchu countered. If they're intolerable, why would the heavens let them exist? Who has the authority to say whether they ought to be tolerated or not? During this chain of questions, Lo Binghe's eyes gradually lit up. There was within him a faint sense of burning passion. Lo Binghe, you may choose to ignore the words of this master. This master tells you from here on out, Shen Qingchu said at last. But you must always remember what I've told you here today. In this world, there is nothing intolerable to the heavens. This is true for all races, as it is true for humans. At this time, though, Lobinga's heart leaned toward the righteous path. He wasn't a pendant, in any case, since whatever was within him couldn't be removed, why not put it to good use? He absolutely had to become stronger, so strong he would never be powerless, strong enough that he could protect Shizun from any hand that dares reach for him. Seeing Lobinga's eyes so dazzlingly bright, Shen Qingchu couldn't imagine what he was thinking, but his own thoughts were a jumbled mess. His advice this time wasn't coming purely from a place of having developed an addiction to being a sage guiding the protagonist's life's journey. The idea of the heaven's magnanimity was a universal concept, older than time itself, and it had been recycled like reheated old rice for decades by the historical wuxia and xiangxia genres without the slightest hint of progress. But in this world of ocean-deep hatred between humans and demons, who were unable to coexist and who had engaged in countless great wars in the past up to the present, the concept was extremely unconventional. There we go. Anyone who espoused it risked unilateral condemnation. As someone of mixed lineage, it had been extremely difficult for the original Lobingha to avoid being impacted by humans' hatred of demons and vice versa. Since the greater half of his life had been harsh and full of misfortunes, he'd even begun to despair and think that perhaps the world and heavens both found his existence intolerable, that he should have never been born. Shen Qingchu hoped that, from this point forth, these words would plant a seed within Lobingha's heart and broaden his perspective, that in the future, when facing the truth of his heritage, he could remain optimistic and not take attacks on his lineage to heart. Perhaps then his behavior wouldn't trend so extreme and he wouldn't become bent on taking revenge on the world. Perhaps even if someday in the future Lobingha had to face Shen Qingchu who would throw him down into the endless abyss, he would be able to understand that his betrayal wasn't his fault. If that was possible, then even if the scenario arrived and the system forced Shen Qingchu to say lines like, "Humans and demons cannot coexist. Their hatred is ocean deep and cannot be overcome. You fucker, hurry up and die," thereby slapping himself so hard he sent himself flying, well, that would be that. Now that the atmosphere had grown heavy, Shen Qingchu felt like he had gone overboard with his cool act. With his terror of embarrassment about to erupt, he coughed once. That said, demons are naturally gifted with spiritual strength, far more so than humans, he said. If their strength could be used for good and was dedicated to the righteous path, to the common people, then how could that not be a good thing? Demons had exceptional talent for cultivation and absolutely crushed the human realm in that area. As the races were different, so too were their energy systems. Humans relied on spiritual chi, where demons relied on demonic chi. Though Shen Qingchu reckoned that the two were basically the same, with only the color and maybe names being distinct. Maybe the demon realm had good feng shui or something, but the vast majority of demons were born fully charged with demonic chi. At the age of 3, they could rip apart a human with their bare hands, and at age 8, they could split mountains and crack stone. This was a bit of an exaggeration, but... However, the truth was that humans had only mediocre aptitude. Even after cultivating for several decades, they could often only achieve the skill of a small demon infant. Even more, humans were likely dried-up pawns, their spiritual strengths practically a perfect egg, i.e., 0. These humans were often said to be lacking spiritual roots, or absent the lot for immortality. It couldn't get worse than that. If it weren't for the humans' comparative love of propagating, and for demons being greatly sparse in numbers, the human realm would have long ago been colonized by the demons. Honestly, they were just coasting on the fact that demon family planning was so strict. After suffering the torments of this world-changing journey, Shen Qingchu hadn't slept the entire night. 2 dark bags already appeared under his eyes. He waved his hand. "It's very late. If there's nothing else, then go and rest." Lebinka obediently asked to be excused, but he hadn't walked so far when Chen Qingzhu called from behind. Come back. Lebinka immediately turned back. Does Shizun have any other instructions? The dorms are that way, said Chen Qingzhu. Why are you walking in the other direction? The, 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 the disciples' dormitories and the woodshed were both a left turn out the door, yet Lobinga had turned to the right. This disciple wants to go to the kitchen first to prepare tomorrow's breakfast for Shizun, said Lobinga. Shen Qingzhu was in a bind. He really wanted to eat Lobinga's breakfast, but having a child cook for him instead of sleeping when it was already so late? Didn't that sound like Cinderella and her stepmother? Either way, it seemed inhumane. In the end, Shen Qingzhu, conscious, went over hit his stomach. He coughed. Nonsense, it's the middle of the night. What is there to cook? Go back and sleep. Lobinka knew his master was worried about him not resting enough and agreed with a smile. But he still planned to sneak off to the kitchen to work later. Shen Qingzhu wanted to ask him if he was still sleeping in the woodshed, but after mulling it over for a moment, he concluded that youths still had their dignity. Asking him outright would be embarrassing. Moreover, even if he had Lobinka sleep in the disciples' dorm, the other students would take Ming Fan's lead and bully him, steal his blankets and hide his shoes or whatnot. The poor thing. Tomorrow, pack up your things and come here, said Shen Qingzhu before Lobinka left. At first, Lobinka didn't understand what he meant. Shizun? There's a side room in the bamboo house. Starting tomorrow, you can move in there. If Lobinka lived a little closer, then in the future it would be easier to have him make breakfast and clean up around the house. Shen Qingzhu's adaptability was, as always, as incredible as a record-breaking dick. Just a moment ago, he had been unable to look at Lobinka in the face, but now he dared to scheme how to make the great protagonist wait on him hand and foot, serve his tea, carry his water, wash his clothes, fold his blankets, etc. Being in the middle of fantasizing, he had to notice said protagonist's reaction. Suddenly, Lobinka pounced on him like a tiger, capturing him in a tight embrace. Caught off guard, Shen Qingzhu jumped in surprise. Then his face reddened. For the first time in his life, someone had wrapped him in a full-body embrace. And it wasn't a warm, gentle, jade-skinned maiden, but a youth brimming with tyrannical energy. Ah! Shizun, overflowing with happiness. Lobinka hugged him around the neck and refused to let him go, crying in his ear over and over again. Shen Qingzhu didn't know where to put his hands, but after floundering for a moment, he placed them on Lobinka's head and stroked his hair. All right, you've cried out. You've cried out to me, hugged me, and made out this racket. And you aren't even a little embarrassed? You are already so big. It's not like you're a 10-year-old child. How do you think this looks? Lobinka hadn't thought about it that deeply. When it was put that way, he suddenly grew ashamed. If he hadn't been overcome by a torrent of joy, he would never have dared to treat his normally aloof and removed Shizun like this. Though reluctantly, he hurried to peel himself from Shen Qingzhu's body, his whole face red. Yes, this disciple has overstepped. When it came for asking for hugs, children under the age of 10 were moe, but the 15-year-old Lobinka was still moe. With a fresh and tender face like this handsome little sprout's, anything you did would be moe. Lobinka floundered for a while, at first a little flustered, but then he noticed that Shen Qingzhu's complexion didn't look particularly good. Though Shen Qingzhu had the immortal body of a cultivator, he was haunted by old injuries and a lingering poison. Then because of Lobinka, he had been dragged into Mengmo's dream realm. He hadn't rested properly and was at his limit, so of course he looked a bit haggard. Lobinka didn't dare interfere with Shen Qingzhu's rest any longer, and grudgingly said his goodbyes. Nevertheless, he didn't return to the woodshed, though this time he made sure to take a detour before going to the kitchen. He promised himself for the next long while he would carefully watch over his master's diet and recuperation. As soon as Lobinka stepped out of the room, a system notification appeared. Protagonist satisfaction points plus 50. Shen Qingzhu was mystified. Why did it add another 50? System lag? Or had the system discovered its conscience and concluded that it had given too little before? Whatever, he was exhausted, so what if the points were added? To the point there was no way he admittedly great self had earned that 50 with a single hug. The next day, Shen Qingchu hadn't yet slept as long as he wanted before the fragrant smell of fish and rice wafted into his room and tempted him awake. Outside the bamboo house, Lo Bingo had spent long hours preparing a meal with utmost care. The scent drew in a great number of Qingjing Peak disciples who were used to eating bland food. They hid off to the side, snooping. Enraged, Mingfen and the others chewed their sleeve hems while watching the scene unfold, especially when Shen Qingchu sat at the table and affectionately sang praises to Lo Binghe for his efforts and handiwork. As the two blissfully smiled at each other, their audience's grief and resentment reached its peak. Utterly shameless to use these licentious schemes and unorthodox method to curry Shizun's favor? That evening, when Lo Binghe moved his things into the side room of Shen Qingchu's house, every last one of Qingjing Peak's disciples who had bullied Lo Binghe were wiped out. It was as if they were struck by lightning from a clear sky, leaving their corpses scattered across the field. Though the words were "moved his things," in truth it was only Lo Binghe moving himself. From the beginning, he never really had anything in his woodshed. His pillow? He had rested his head upon a bundle of straw he found there. Blankets, his outer robes had covered him, and then of course Shen Qingchu had prepared the real deal for him already. Shen Qingchu had always thought that Lo Binghe's life was unbearably miserable, just a textbook case of child abuse. Qingchong mountain sect was one of the major sects in the cultivation world. How could people's hearts have grown so dark in such a place? How could their resources be so lacking? That night, Lo Binghe laid on a normal bed for the first time in his life. Before he had laid in a wooden basin floating down an icy river, then on a damp, cold ground, then between noisy streets, then even in mountain caves while roughing it out in the wild. It had become normal. Conversely, now that he was sleeping on a soft and tidy bamboo bed, his entire body felt light, floaty, like none of this was real. It was especially unreal when he thought of Shen Qingchu sleeping in the main room, just a wall away. That night, perhaps because Lo Binghe had too much on his mind, Meng Mo didn't appear in his dream realm. So Lo Binghe remained composed and waited. Sure enough, a few days later, Meng Mo appeared once more. This time, Meng Mo didn't set up some mysterious barrier, having not intended to hide in the first place. Instead, he appeared directly in Lo Binghe's dream, though he did so in the form of a cloud of black mist. This cloud of black mist expanded and contracted before Lo Binghe's eyes, endlessly transforming, and that aged voice echoed from within it, "What have you decided in these 3 days, boy?" "Does Senior Meng Mo not know my decision?" Lo Binghe replied. Meng Mo chuckled. "You have chosen a path you definitely won't regret. Remember this day, boy. Today is the beginning of your meteoric rise." With what youth didn't dream of meteoric success? Meng Mo's words rang with grand heroic spirit, but Lo Binghe was unmoved. He only cupped his fist and bowed. "This junior has one more request." "What is it? Out with it. Hurry up and finish so you can finally become my apprentice," Meng Mo urged him on, not realizing that he was being far too optimistic. "That is precisely what this junior wanted to speak about," said Lo Binghe. "My master treats me with utmost kindness. I really can't apprentice under anyone without his permission." Fine, Meng Mo interrupted before he could finish at the end of his patience. "This elder won't demand the title of master and apprentice. Is that enough?" Had any extraordinary master ever come away with a worse deal? He was falling over himself to teach someone his people's technique, yet he wouldn't even get to hear his student call him Shifu. How was his plight any different from that of an absolute devoted yet bitterly suffering concubine who couldn't gain official status? Lo Binghe smiled. "Then many thanks to Senior." He wasn't remotely willing to call anyone other than Shen Qingchu Shizun. As he eyed Lo Binghe, Meng Mo was sure that he still had a physical body. His nose would have gone crooked with rage. This Lo Binghe was all cute and obedient in front of his master, just like that of a little white lotus. So then, why was he so hard to deal with for other people? Two completely different faces. He was practically a different person. This elder is going to die of rage. And that is chapter 3. Let me quickly put my bookmark in. So, that's chapter 3, and I will be seeing you in the next chapter. I hope you enjoyed.